Hello! So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. One of my followers asked me to make a relationship tracker. I already have one, a very miniature one in my usual tracking, but she asked for something a little bit more in depth. So I went to work and she gave me a few ideas on what she wanted to include. And yeah, so I've made one up, so I'm going to take you through that today and what all the different bits are for and why they might be helpful. Okay, so I was thinking you could either call this a relationship tracking page, because you're keeping track of it, but if you wanted something a little less formal or clinical, you could say relationship care, a relationship care spread. Or if you're maybe in a relationship that is, I'm sorry, you can probably hear all they're cutting the grass in the park outside, so please excuse the noisy, I was going to say a bad word, the noisy people. Or you could call it relationship observations. And I'm thinking, you might want to call it observations if you're in like a relationship that maybe you're going through a trial period, or you're seeing if things are going to work out between the two of you, that sort of thing. But it's completely up to you. You can call it whatever you want, whatever feels right. Now, I suppose this could be seen as kind of a controversial spread, because it's not just something you're tracking for yourself, it involves another person. So I've tried to keep it with as little intrusion on the other person as possible. So please keep that in mind. I'm not trying to really upset, the partner or use this against them. This is to help you see when things might need a little bit of TLC, or especially if you're trying to decide whether or not a relationship is worth saving, this could be helpful as well. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to go through the actual tracking parts of it. So I've got status, which basically means the state of your relationship, I suppose you could call it. So what I personally do is, depending on how the relationship is going, I've got a sort of key, I suppose. I'll put it up in this corner. So you've got the different, I've got too many pens going on here. Try not to throw it everywhere. Okay, so it's pretty simple. I'm just going to talk you through these. I'm not going to label them, but I want somewhere to put them. So I'm using symbols in my tracker to see sort of, it's a combination of the health of our relationship and how I'm feeling in our relationship. So if things are going steady, it's just a straight line. If things are going well, you get an arrow pointed towards the right, and if things are going really, really well, I do an upwards arrow. The flip side of that is if things aren't going quite so good. So this one is like things are going quite steady. This one here is, okay, we're having a little bit of a wobble, but it's not bad. It just doesn't feel quite right. And then this one means, okay, it's not going well. We need to do something about this now. And then a downwards one means it's gotten pretty serious. you know, it really needs some attention. I kind of like the rule that as long as your relationship is more in this part, then you're doing okay and it's not too bad. Whereas if it starts falling into, obviously you're all going to get days where the relationship is down here, but if it's consistently down here, it's really worth you know, looking into maybe counselling, or even if the relationship is something you want to continue with. So that's, I find, really helpful. So we've got status. The next one is conflict. You could also say, you know, have we had an argument? Is this a day where we've had an argument? But I'm using the word conflict. So you would check off the box if you had an argument or some sort of spat. I've got like some subcategories here, and you could change these. I've chosen money, kids, and mess. So these are just categories that I sort of pulled from the top of my head as ones that I think might be something most people struggling with their relationships that cause conflict or arguments. Money is obviously a big one. And then kids, and then mess I've done for like if the house is messy and who's cleaning the house, whose job is it, who's slacking, that sort of thing. And obviously you don't need these categories, but I think it's helpful to see what is the argument about. And if it's something reoccurring, if it always seems to be about money, then obviously that's something you need to work on. If it's always about the kids, that's something you need to work on, etc., etc. You could change these categories if you wanted. If you're not finding that you tend to be arguing about the same thing a lot, then over here we have a notes section. So in this notes section, what I would personally do is, excuse me, write in the days of the month. This isn't based on any particular real month, it's just, I'm just going for it. So let's say Monday 1. Now what you could use this for is obviously notes. You could use it for notes. So things like, if you did have an argument, if you don't want to track the other things, what was the argument about? There's lots of other things in here that you could note down, and I will be going through them as I go through each tracking category to sort of explain what else it can be used for. The next one is, was the argument resolved? Now this is fairly important because obviously if you're leaving something and you're not mentioning it and you're ignoring it, it's just going to fester, and one of you is going to be feeling resentful because it's not been sorted. So was the conflict resolved? And obviously you want to aim to make sure whenever you get a conflict, you want to aim that you'll be able to check this one off as well. The next one might seem quite petty, but actually I think it's really important. It's who apologised. And we've got, was it me? Or was it your significant other? Now the reason, this was a question, or this was something the lady that asked me to do this, she said, could you include who apologises? And some people might think that that's a little bit odd and it's keeping score. But sometimes I think it's important to make sure that, number one, you're not the only one constantly apologising, because if you are, that's not right. And number two, if you're always giving in, then you feel like you're being taken advantage of, and that it makes you more vulnerable because it means that the other person can get away with anything. Plus, you want to make sure that, number one, you're taking responsibility and making sure that you are apologising. And number two, you want to make sure that your significant other is taking responsibility and that you're both putting equal effort into making sure that this relationship runs smoothly. So I think it's important to, you don't necessarily have to track it, but I think it's important to keep in mind that both people in the partnership need to be making sure that they're making an effort to apologise and smooth things over. The next one we have is quality time. So you might have a goal in mind that you want your relationship to, you want to be closer with your partner, and obviously that means actually spending some quality time with them and having a good conversation. I want to mention with the resolved, you could write in the notes how it was resolved, what you did you compromise, did you give in, you can work out how it was resolved. And the apology, maybe you might want to write down how you apologised, what you did to apologise, because if one way is working better than another, maybe it's better to do that more often. So quality time. Yeah, because obviously if you want to become closer with your partner, you need to spend proper time together and not just sat in front of the television, actually having conversations with each other. So with quality time, in the notes you could write down maybe what you did or what you spoke about, whatever it was that made you feel like you were closer together. The next one is sex. Woohoo! Now, there are lots of reasons people might track sex. Number one, it might be to do with their cycle and their period and their sex drive, finding out when their sex drive is higher or lower. Another one is if you're trying to get pregnant, so you might be working out when you're ovulating and then trying to get sex, that sort of thing. Trying to get sex, trying to have sex. And then the not so pleasant one, but fairly understandable one, I think, is, you know, when I'm on a mums group and on Facebook, and a lot of the time the mums are saying, my partner complains that I don't give them enough sex, and I definitely have more sex than he says I do, and that sort of thing. You could use it for that, so that when your partner says, oh, we only have sex like once a week or something like that, or maybe even less, I don't know what people's preferences are, but if you feel that that's an unfair comment, you can possibly use this one to say, you're wrong, look how many times we've had sex. It's not something I would recommend. I don't think you should use sex as a weapon. But if it's something that you're really struggling with in your relationship and it's a real bone of contention, that can help. The next one is, I've put in period, okay? But I'm not going to write that down because I've realised there's something I've forgotten to add. But you might want to track if you're on your period in this section, because number one, it's next to the sex and that kind of goes together. But also, as women, when we're on our periods, we become hormonal and relationships might suffer. Emotions might be all over the place. So it might be an interesting thing to see if your period and your cycle is affecting your relationship, because maybe it's affecting your mood. But what I'm actually going to put in here is love language. And I think that's how you spell language. I think it is. So, if you haven't heard of the book, The 5 Love Languages, if you're wanting to improve your relationship with your partner, I highly recommend reading it. It's about the fact that people like to give and receive love in different ways. And there's 5 different ones. I'll try to remember them. There's gift giving, acts of service, affirmations, quality time, and touch and affection and that sort of thing. So you might be someone that feels really loved when your partner does things for you around the house. Like doing the dishes or cleaning up or helping out with the kids. That might make you feel really loved and supported and cared for. Whereas the other person in the relationship might feel more loved when they are being cuddled and touched and kissed and, you know, shown lots of physical affection. So if your love language is cleaning and tidying, if you're speaking your language to them and you're thinking, well, I'm going to clean up the house for them and I'm going to, iron their shirts, or I'm going to fold their clothes, I'm going to run some errands for them, those sort of things. If your partner isn't really fussed about that sort of thing, those things are going to go unnoticed. That you're not going to realise that actually, your partner's not going to realise that that's you showing affection. And it goes the same way. Say you're the woman and he's the man. I'm going a bit stereotypical here. But you're the woman, you want him to do housework and things. He's the man, he wants cuddles and sex and all that sort of thing. So if he's trying to give you lots of cuddles and kisses and sex, that might be his way of showing how much he loves you. But maybe you don't register it that way. Maybe you register that as being pestered, when actually you've got a lot to do, and it would be a lot nicer if he actually helped around the house. So it's really, really handy to know your partner's love language and to make sure your partner knows what your love language is. So here I'm thinking you could track your love language, or your partner's love language more specifically. Did you do something that spoke their language? Did you do something that they would recognise as something loving and affectionate? Whether that be gift giving or affirmations, which is to do with lots of compliments and sending nice texts and little messages and leaving notes around, that sort of thing. Did you do something like that to make sure that they know that they're loved? Because you might be doing other things. You might be doing lots of other things for them that you think is affectionate. But if that's not how they receive love, they're not going to recognise it as something loving. I hope that's making sense. And the final category here that I thought of that might have an effect on your relationship is medication. So any meds you're taking. Now, if it's something that affects your hormones, something like that, then obviously that could have an effect. If, like me, you're someone who's in pain a lot, if it's something that eases your pain, maybe that means that you're more able to be a better partner in the relationship. On the flip side, maybe your partner is suffering with depression, and maybe you're noticing that their mood is dropping, so you suggest that they go on some sort of antidepressant or medication to help. Or it could be the same for you. Maybe you realise that you need to go on an antidepressant or an anti-something medication, something to help you. If you start taking medication, you can mark it in here, and if you notice an improvement, then you know that that medication is helping. So that's something that might affect it. Also, if you're someone that has to take a one-off medication every now and again that maybe really affects your mood or something like that, you could see if that's affecting it. So medication could be helpful. It might be an idea to track your partner's mood. Now, this isn't something I personally do because I feel it's a little bit intrusive. So I recommend getting your partner's permission first, but also it could be subjective. You might be thinking that your partner's in a really bad mood and they're really irritated with you or something like that, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're just taking a quiet time. So it all comes down to perspective. So your view of their mood might be completely wrong. You might be interpreting it the wrong way. So it's a bit tricky. But if you know for sure, if you know your partner well and you know that they are not themselves and something's going on, maybe you could track that and see if it correlates to maybe the weather. That's something you could track in here, or write in your notes of whether the weather was bad. Some people suffer with SAD syndrome, and that really affects their mood and then will affect their relationship and that sort of thing. So medication as well. But yes, like I say, be very careful if you're tracking somebody else's mood or somebody else's movements, anything like that, because it's a personal thing and it can be seen as quite intrusive. So the final category I have here is how much time you spent together. And then I've got in brackets here, awake. You're not going to track the time that you're asleep. That doesn't count. So here I've got more than 2 hours at the very bottom, more than 4 hours, more than 6, more than 8, you can see where this is going, more than 10, and more than 12. Now, if you track how much time you're spending together, you might find one of two things. Number one, maybe you're spending too much time together. Maybe you're in each other's pockets and you're just pissing each other off because you're just at each other all the time and you just want a little bit of space. Okay, I don't know about anybody else, but I like time on my own. And if my partner's around me all the time, it means that every little thing he does starts to irritate me, and it's not necessarily his fault. Sometimes it is, but not necessarily. So spending too much time together can be detrimental, but also not spending enough time together can be a problem. So by tracking the hours you spend together, with a little bit of trial and error, eventually you can find out your sort of relationship sweet spot of how much time you want to be spending together. Okay, so I'm going to fill a little bit of this out like it would be, like I would do on a normal day. I'm going to pretend, I don't know, let's pretend my name is Maggie and my partner's name is Boris. Boris and Maggie, okay? So this isn't based on my relationship. This is just an example of how you could fill this out. So maybe your relationship is going well, and it's going well, and then it goes really well, and then you have a day where it's going well again, then you have an okay day, and it's going really well again, going well, and then an okay day, and then another okay day, and then maybe you have a bit of a wobble. Then it's okay, and you have a bit of a wobble, and then the next day is a bit of a wobble, and then you find that it's not so good. And then maybe it's wobbling again, and then it's really bad, and then it's not so good, and then it's not so good, and then it's bad, and then it's bad. So if you notice that something like this happened, obviously something around here happened that started causing this. Now you could say maybe there was no conflict on these, maybe there was a conflict on this day about the kids or money. Let's say it was about money, and maybe it was resolved, and maybe you both apologized to each other. Okay, and let's just say you had some sex afterwards because you love each other lots and it was fiery argument. So I'm filling this out to give you an idea. So if you looked at this, you could say, oh, we did have conflict about money, but it was resolved and we both apologized to each other. So I felt our relationship went really, really well that day. So then maybe over here you had another argument about money. So that counts as you had conflict and it was about money. Maybe it wasn't resolved. Maybe you didn't spend any quality time together. Maybe one of you started taking some medication that made you feel a little bit iffy. So you could see here that this medication possibly caused or encouraged the conflict, which made the relationship not go quite so well. If you're noticing a pattern in any of this, I'm just going to plug my camera in. There we go. So if I say if you're noticing a pattern here, then it might be something that's been, you need to flag it up and maybe even talk to your partner and say, look, we're having conflict about money a lot. Obviously, I'm filling this in very sparsely just to give you an idea. But it would give you an idea of what's causing it and possibly how you can improve it. Because if you're finding you're arguing a lot, but you're not speaking each other's love language, then, maybe you need to start speaking each other's love language and maybe spending more quality time with each other, that sort of thing. There's several ways you could fill out the time spent together. You could do it like a bar graph. Say you spent like 7 hours together that day and 10 hours together that day and maybe 4 hours. So you could fill it in like that, or you could fill it in with like the dots for a line graph and then eventually connect them up like that. You could also, if you wanted to get really fancy with it, use colours. So you could have maybe a colour chart to say maybe red is very bad, orange is okay, yellow is pretty good, and then green is good, that sort of thing. And you could maybe colour in whether it was good time spent together or bad time spent together, because that also means that, say you spent 10 hours together and some of it was good, you could fill in half of it as green, and some of it was bad, you could fill in half of it with red. So it gives you a more in-depth look. So obviously this is, you know, it goes into a lot of detail, and it's definitely not something that everybody will need. But if you're trying to work on your relationship, or like I say, you're trying to decide whether or not this relationship is worth saving, then this could be really, really helpful. Also, for someone who's in a domestic abuse relationship, maybe you could add in whether you felt it was your fault, the argument, or the conflict, anything like that. Because if you're in a domestic abuse situation, it's very, very common to feel like you're always the one that's doing something wrong, because the partner can do something called gaslighting, which makes you feel like everything's your fault. They'll start the conflict and sort of rattle you up and then give you the silent treatment or do something like that. And then they'll turn it, so it makes it seem like it was your fault, and you eventually believe that it is your fault. So it's definitely worth checking something like this. Also, if you're in a domestic abuse relationship, if you have friends or family that are saying they don't like your partner, or that something that your partner's done is unreasonable, listen to them, because you don't always have a clear perspective. Because if you're in a domestic abuse relationship, that person will be very good at manipulating how you're feeling and what you're thinking. They're experts at it. And when you're in the situation, it's very difficult to see things clearly. Somebody from the outside, someone who loves you like a family member or a friend, if they're noticing something and they're bringing it up a lot, it might be a good idea to step back and take notice of what they're saying. But if ever you are feeling like you might be in a... Because domestic abuse doesn't always have to be physical. It doesn't have to be physical. Obviously, that's something that you could track as well. Whether there was physical abuse or swearing or shouting, anything like that, you could track that. Because maybe to see it in the tracker every day, or, you know, more often than not, would be the push you need to say, look, this hasn't changed over these many months, or it's getting worse, or it hasn't got better. Might be worth doing something like that for your own sanity and to give you a better perspective on what's going on without the emotions in it. If it's all written down in black and white and it's just, you've just gone on the facts, then, you know, you can sort of decide without a lot of emotion. You just look at the facts and say, look, this is not good. I can see it here in black and white. Maybe I should be thinking about leaving or speaking to someone. So it's a little bit off track. This wasn't necessarily meant for people in domestic abuse relationships, but it could be helpful, and it could possibly be a lifesaver. You know, if you're realising that this abuse is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, at what point do you call it a day? You know? So, there is that. So finally, I just wanted to go back through the notes section and just give you a few ideas of what you might want to put in here. Obviously, number one, what did you fight about? What was the conflict about? You might want to write in anything you were particularly anxious about. Maybe you were anxious about a particular friend they've got that you think might be influencing them badly. Maybe you're anxious about their mood might be dropping and you're worried about that. Maybe you're anxious about the fact that you haven't spoken for a while. You can put in whether or not your partner made you feel angry. So did they do something to really piss you off? On the flip side of that, you can also write in, was there anything that you or they did that made the relationship better, that made you feel happy, that you felt was an improvement? Is there anything that you were proud of? Did you spend extra time together? Did you do something different? Did you get out of the little box and your little home and go out somewhere and spend time doing something different? Was one of you kind? That's a big one, making sure that you are both being kind to each other. So noting down, was I kind? Was he kind? Was one of you unkind? Noting down whether you were unkind. And then also, if you're doing the 5 love languages, what did you do, or did they do in particular, that helped? Maybe you went out of your way to give your partner lots and lots of cuddles and kisses because you know that's their love language, and maybe you found that it made an improvement. Maybe you tried giving them a foot rub or a back rub and that didn't work quite so well. You'd be able to see maybe in here whether it helped or not. So you'll be able to see which ones are more effective. So there's lots and lots of things you can write in your notes. I definitely recommend writing in anything that you think might have affected your relationship, and also try to take a step back and note down the things that you take for granted. When you're in a relationship day to day, things can become quite samey and quite normal, whereas to other people it might not be normal. So it's a good idea to try and take, there's lots of good ideas, it's a good idea to take a step back and really look at your relationship objectively, and just write in anything that you think is significant to your relationship. And then if you're in a relationship that you have found to be not so good, and your partner is always saying, don't worry, it will get better, I'll make sure things get better, I'll do more, I'll do this more, I'll do that more. It's very easy for someone to say that, and it's very easy for you to believe them because you love them and you want the relationship to work. But if in here, over several months or even years, and you're not seeing a difference, then you know that what they're saying is not true, and you should just take it with a pinch of salt. Go on their actions, not what they're saying. Okay, so that's the end of my relationship spread. I really hope somebody found it helpful. Like I say, do check out the 5 love languages. It's extra helpful if you have a partner who is also wanting to speak your love language. But if it's, if they're not someone who's willing to read the book or do something like that, you can still try and speak their love language, because you might find that they become softer and more, more open to exploring something like that and trying new things. So, give it a go. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you would add into this tracker that you think might affect something. This isn't necessarily something I will use. I might give it a try for a month just to sort of have a look, see where things go. Or maybe I might try it 1 month and then give it 3 or 4 months and try it again and see where we are and if there's any sort of change, something like that. So it's not necessarily something you have to use all the time. But that's it. I really wish you a very, very happy relationship with whoever you're with. And I hope that this spread will help some of you, or maybe improve your relationships, or get some of you out of difficult relationships. So yeah, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. I'll leave a link to the 5 Love Languages book. You can get it on Amazon or Kindle. And it's had lots and lots of good reviews. Also, if any of you have any book suggestions for anybody that might be working on their relationship, please leave those down in the comments as well, and why you found it helpful. And that is definitely it. I have finished. Okay. Yeah, best of luck to you all, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!